Welcome to Journey of an Aesthete podcast. I am your host, Mitch Hampton, and this is part of a series we are running, long-running mini-series that I call Travels with the Dark, or Travels with Darkness, which is hard to describe. It's not necessarily always true crime, but sometimes it is. And we're welcome back one of my favorite people, one of my favorite guests, Deb, Madam B, you're in Paris as we speak, right?
Yes.
All right. And the subject of today's episode is, I call Charlie's Lawn Shadow. Charlie Manson, the Manson killings, 68, 69, those years, the Manson case. And I have here, as you can see, I even have this, Ed Sanders' book on Sharontate, Ed Sanders' first edition, The Family, the classic, of course, BeverlyHills, HelterSkelter. I even have this novelization of all things, right, Tarantino? So, and Chaos, right? Tom O'Neill's book. So I have all these books, and I thought it would be, you're someone who is a true crime aficionado and you researcher, and I know, and with all seriousness, you are.
One of millions on the planet.
Sure. One of millions, but I respect your way, the way that you do it. But where do you want to begin with this? Because it's such a big topic, and there's been a lot of recent media. There's been, I met Errol Morris twice, and when I lived in Boston, when he presented the Fog of War about McNamara in Vietnam, and the Wormwood picture, which relates to this one actually. His movie Chaos, Tom O'Neill. Emma Cline wrote, I think, a pretty good novel called The Girls, which I can recommend, and a lot of media. So, but where do you want to start? I think it would be good to start with what are the actual facts. Like, in 1966, this person did this, or Bobby Boussalet was hitchhiking, or
Gosh,
did you want to see characters?
It's so hard. I mean, I think everybody kind of starts and works chronologically, starting from the murders.
From the back. Okay, you want to go.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody kind of starts there, but are there people that don't know what happened? I guess that's my big question. And I guess I kind of go through the world assuming that everybody is obsessed with the same kinds of things that I'm obsessed with, which is not true at all.
I think a lot of people don't know. For example, they may not know that there was more than those two nights of murder.
Right.
That they killed that guy, Sparky, that when the last guy to be murdered, and then also, I think Charlie himself might have murdered a couple of minor age girls, possibly, that was never. Of course, he raped some too. It's a really just one that I should say before we go ahead. This is one of the darkest. I mean, you could talk about Ted Bundy and your Golden Gate Killer and these people. Those are bad. This, to me, still is one of the darkest, most sinister events in American history, popular cultural history. I don't think it's been surpassed, really.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. And I think my first question then is, it's the year 2025, and we're still talking about this. And people like Errol Morris are still making movies about this man. Every once in a while, every time that there's some kind of Manson-related event, the whole case gets kicked back up, and every news network, every podcast, every YouTube channel kind of jumps on the moment to kind of revive the story. And I guess younger generations are kind of just starting to find out about this as they come into their own interest in true crime, and why this case resonates more than any other case in American history, and maybe any other case.
That's a good question. Yeah.
In true crime history, because you can only think of maybe a hand. You can think Jack the Ripper, for example. That will always go on. But in this case with Manson, there are no real secrets anymore, because we know what happened. We know who did it. We know the exact facts of what happened. So all of the discussion really is surrounding motive and cause and effect and correlations and context and all of the distinguishing factors of that cultural moment. And that to me is why, I think, you couldn't, for example, I don't think that this could have happened in 1989.
No,
It couldn't have happened in 89. It couldn't have
impossible.
happened. Like, I don't even think it could have happened like in 79. I think it really,
You're right
by
about
that,
that. Yeah.
I think by the time, this is going to sound like a dumb theory, but I think by the time disco came around and people were just kind of ready for a little lightness, a little less gravity, that people wanted some levity and some fun, and just like, as soon as that era came around of kind of decadence and hedonism, I think that there was just no appetite anymore for the kind of like chaos, revolutionary chaos that you saw during the late 60s and the early 70s. And and to make it very clear, when I was a young woman, or I should say even as a kid, I felt a lot of affinity with the whole hippie movement. I was really enamored with the whole idea of counterculture and social and cultural revolution. And I kind of, I often mourned the fact that I wasn't born just a bit earlier to have kind of been a part of that. I was more a kid of like the late 70s and the 80s. So, I look at, and of course, this was the case that first grasped my attention. HelterSkelter was the first true crime book that I ever read.
Wow.
And, I was very, very young. I read it when it, very shortly after.
Would you have been a child or?
Oh yeah, I was a child. I was a kid. I may have been 9, 10, 11. I wrote it in my biography. I tracked exactly like when I read that book, and I think it might have been 9 or 10. I was really young, and so
So my first introduction, hold that thought, was watching the Steve Railsback movie. So a made-for-TV movie.
I remember that, the made-for-TV. He was great. Yeah. Boy, he was great in that.
Railsback was good in that. Yeah. Then he went on to do the movie The Stuntman. Kind of forgotten actor, great actor. Yeah, but it's basically, so I watched that TV movie. Speaking of TV movies, one of my favorite topics, 70s, especially 70s TV movies, before I read Helter Skelter. And then I read HelterSkelter, this old used paperback that my father had. And it was in a really worn, I had to buy a new copy of HelterSkelter. So it was really coming.
Yeah, it's the same one that I think.
Bugliosi. And then only years later, when I used to host video parties in the 80s at my house, I would show the Hendrickson documentary with Spawn Ranch. And
my favorite one. That's definitely, I think that's the most important documentary. If I have to recommend.
Well, first of all, that's an amazing piece of filmmaking. Is it from 72? What's it called?
It is. Yeah, I think maybe even a little earlier than that. By this time, Charlie was already facing.
Oh yeah. He was in jail.
Yeah.
No, I mean, that film really takes you into the mindset of this cult.
Yeah.
Which isn't a cult. Yeah. I mean, it's.
And you get to see really just how I'm going to say brainwashed. I kind of liken Manson and the Manson family to what's happening today on a massive scale worldwide with influencers and all of these.
You're right.
They're kind of all these micro cults now,
I don't want to. I mean, we can jump into the present because I guess you do that because I think maybe there's an urgency.
Well, I'm saying that I think Charlie was ahead of the curve. He spent his first 35 years or whatever of his life, like going in and out of prison, mostly in prison. And during this time, he studied the people like, Dale Carnegie and the Scientology, like Ron L. Hubbard. And he kind of learned like what are all these mind tricks that you use to kind of draw people into you, this kind of Svengali. And
that's interesting. He's so hold that thought. So he's in a way like some of today's malign influencers, the people that, well, there's so many of them, the people that are basically, not to mention this name yet again, behind Trumpism and MAGA. That's like a cult, right? Basically.
Oh, yeah.
Actually, I should say full. What MAGA is it's actually a born again Christian evangelical cult. So it's a Christian cult actually, but that's a whole. So it really, even even though it has somebody
I
at
don't
the
even think
same.
it's a born again. I wouldn't even call it a cult anymore, Mitch. I think it's a mass movement with cult features.
Okay, well, yeah, cult. I guess why? Because cult is technically a small group, and this took
Mm-hmm.
over one of the superpower countries.
MAGA's not a small group. MAGA is a mass movement.
Much bigger. But my point is that what is interesting, of course, is, as you said now, the techniques of selling an idea or selling a product or selling a cause are remarkably similar to what Charlie Manson was doing in the 60s, right? You're saying there's a similar. Did you want to go into what those techniques are and then talk about the crimes or the facts?
Well, I guess we can kind of like briefly go over the facts of the crime. So hopefully I can remember exactly who was there on what night. So in summer of 69, so this is like on the tail of the summer of love and all of that. You know, Charlie had ordered a number of the members of the family to drive to a specific house on CieloDrive in the Hollywood Hills, and to kill everybody inside, and to do it in a way that was outrageous, that would get a lot of attention. He instructed them to leave something witchy. And so it was Ted Watson, LindaKasabian, who was the driver, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Susan Atkins.
Also known as AKA Sadie.
Yeah, also known as Sadie Mae Glutz.
She's also the person that confessed in jail to Virginia when she was in prison.
Yeah. She couldn't hold
and
her.
Actually, also not to remember, but LindaKasabian, of course, was the woman who turned state cooperated with the prosecution, turned state, became a snitch, as the term would have been, states.
Yeah, and again, we could do 6 episodes just on her, actually.
But these different. So go on. So these really gruesome murders. I mean, just unbelievable.
They went. It's important to note that on the way in, as they were coming down the driveway, they encountered a young man named Stephen Parent, who was just in his car about to drive home. He had come onto the car.
He was kind of a math whiz, right, into computers and technology. He was kind of at the glasses. No, that was
just a normal kind of,
kid. I think he was selling stereos.
I think he had gone there to buy a clock radio from the guy who was the caretaker. And the caretaker was on the property that night, but lived in a separate little kind of mother-in-law apartment that was at closer to the top of the driveway. Because you have to remember the way the house was set up, that the street is at the top. And then there is a driveway that kind of goes downhill, and then the house is there. There's a lot of like yard and a lot of like greenery around the house. It was kind of built in this kind of French country style. So the caretaker had his own digs on the property, and Stephen Parent was just leaving the caretaker's digs with the clock radio that he had just bought. Tex Watson walks up to the car. And Stephen Parent, sees the gun. He's like, "Oh, please, please just let me go. I won't say anything." And Watson just shoots him dead right there in the car. After that, he goes down with the 3 girls, and they start breaking and entering the house, which wasn't hard because nothing was really locked that night. This is another thing that you have to remember. Hollywood was a different place, and they would leave their locks unlocked and doors unlocked. Even, I can remember as a kid, like even growing up in Chicago, we never locked our doors. We locked it at night maybe, but for the most part, your door kind of stayed unlocked during the day. Well, these people, for sure, they're living in this remote kind of, enclosed property. They're not thinking that anybody's going to come in and, do anything to them. They're optimistic, young, beautiful people.
Right. And that's what I want to add a little bit to that. So part of understanding the Manson case, the Manson murders, is understanding the culture both the good and the bad, because there was a lot of, as you said, a lot of good and some good in the hippie movement. Sort of the optimism of we're not going to lock our doors. It's also one thing that Joan Didion mentioned twice, both in interviews and also in her book, was that there was a kind of an openness that prevailed in Los Angeles in California that was shut after the murder. So that kind of openness.
That's
and
right.
That's kind of alongside what and so that went down to the fact it was easy to get into this house, this wealthy home.
It was easy to get into the house. It wasn't locked. You know, it was easy to get into the driveway. It was just easy to get in. There were no alarms. There were no, if there were, they certainly weren't like set up that night.
Right.
So these four go into the house and they start kind of doing the thing that they had already kind of trained to do, which were the creepy crawls, which I'll talk about that in a second. But for now, just know that they were all in black and they're walking through this house. And so at the time, it was Sharon was there with her ex-boyfriend, Jay Sebring, who had been a famous hairstylist for the Stars. There was Abigail Folger, who was the heiress to the Folger coffee. And her boyfriend, Wojciech Frykowski. So these are the four people that are in the house, and they were just like having a good time. Sharon was more than 8 months pregnant at this time. And then these four people, and at the time, actually, I think Abigail Folger was in bed just reading. And at one point, I believe it was Susan Atkins, she sees Susan Atkins walk by her open bedroom door, and she says hello to her because she just imagines that this must be another friend of Sharon's, Yeah,
just people passing through. That it's that back to that openness of, my home is your house.
Which is astounding because if you think of it, think about it, Mitch. If you were in bed, like no matter whose house you were at, you're in house, you know who's in the house that evening, and then some strange person walks by. You know that who is this? That person's not supposed to be here. But at the time, there was such openness and such a culture of
such a different culture,
hanging out. Like there was very much this kind of open hippie spirit. Even though these were kind of wealthy, wealthy Hollywood figures. So at some point, Tex speaks, and he orders everybody, he orders the girls to tie them up, and they're like, "Why are you doing this?" And he says, "I'm the devil."
Famous line, "I'm here to do the devil's business."
I'm here to do the devil's work or the devil's business or something like that. And so these people were really just the actual murders were so brutal. Like even just thinking, when I think about them, I feel kind of like, you get anxiety just thinking about what these people went through in that house. That they were stalked and terrorized for, a while before they were murdered. And I don't want to get,
I just want to do so in Ed Sanders' book, The Family, which I highly recommend. I actually like it better than Bugliosi book.
I've read it. I've read it. Yeah, I've read that one.
Well, it's so bad that they actually feel they had failed, the girls, because they had wanted to physically mutilate the bodies and take the eyeballs out and put them on the wall. So in other words, they were upset that it wasn't gruesome enough. They wanted to go further. And it's insane. It's insane.
There was some kind of just frenzy going on with those four that night. It was a frenzy. The killing was frenzied. It was deranged. Say what you will, but these people were not, they weren't in their right minds. And I don't say that to like, excuse them or anything like that. I think that, at least two of those people were already not in their right minds even before. Well, my thinking is most of these people that joined Charlie, they were already kind of not in their right mind when even before they met him, whether it's because of childhood trauma or just, it could just be childhood neglect. It could be any number of things that just, they weren't happy. They were going through something. And a few of those characters had legitimate kind of cluster-B personality disorders, like Lynette Squeaky Fromm.
I mean, that is so interesting in light of their upper middle class provenance. In other words, the people that you're saying had these problems were valedictorians. I mean, football star, Jack Swanson's football star.
Yeah.
So it goes to show that the girls could get straight A's and be, the top of their. So in other words, that's always brought up to see how unlikely, in the movie, in the show Mindhunter, Bill Tench, holds up the thing. How do we get from this, showing these valedictorian girls, and the picture of Manson, the Manson with the beard? But you're saying, I guess what you're saying is important, is that we don't really know the biographies of these girls, and we look at their characters' biographies. They come to this. You're saying with
I think we know enough about their biographies to be able to speculate on what was going on with them emotionally and psychologically at the time. And I'm not saying that they were, mentally ill. I'm not saying that. I think that a couple of them definitely were. I think Susan Atkins and Lynette Fromm were by far the two most deranged of the family members. And I mean deranged as in truly like personality disordered beyond repair. But the others, you could say were going through some kind of depression or anxiety, or, just like in the case of Leslie Van Houten, her parents divorced, and this was like earth shattering. If you're, if you come from a family that's, this nuclear Christian suburban family, and then your family's divorced, that for some people, especially back then, that was earth shattering.
Oh yeah, it would have been a major trauma for Leslie.
Yeah, and then in other cases, like with Krenwinkel is the one that really has always baffled me a little bit, because I think about like nothing she was going through was like that intense. She felt constricted by the constraints of growing up suburban and Christian and nuclear family and all of that. And in a way, like a lot of that movement, that hippie movement, was a pushback against that as the social norm across America, that, white, Christian, suburban, even you can even take the white part out of it, but just being Christian, conservative, suburban is enough. But Krenwinkel, because of the things that she did on that night, the mind boggles, like what could have been so bad about your childhood that, okay, so you didn't feel loved enough. You had a cold parent. So apparently having a cold parent is enough to drive somebody to like on a path towards not just a murder where you're just walking up to someone and shooting them, but this was a frenzied, like Abigail Folger was so many
frenzy. Well, the frenzy of taking a knife 20, 30 times over and over again. And
more than that, even.
Gleefully laughing
and enjoying it.
Yeah, gleefully laughing and probably having orgasms while doing it, most likely.
I don't doubt it. I really think that there was a lot going on there. And hearing Krenwinkel over the years in her interviews and hearing her talk about it, when she talks about her crimes, she's very performative. She does not exude genuine remorse. None of them do. None of them have ever none of them have ever displayed genuine remorse. I think Van Houten was released from prison mostly because she's getting older, and this is something that prisons will do, is they'll release elderly inmates so that they don't have to pick up the tab for the medical and whatever other costs are coming as a result of the inmate's age. I don't think Van Houten should have been released. I don't think any of them should have been released. They're lucky enough that death penalty got commuted while they were in prison.
That happened. I mean, the death penalty was eliminated in the 70s in California, right? And that's why they didn't die. It's interesting. You and I do agree on this. I'm very hard on these girls. I don't think that there's so, and I do also agree. So I'm suspicious. I don't think they really, none of them, not Tex, Charles Watson, none of them really expressed a genuine remorse. I don't think.
None of them did. None of them did. They all pulled the, Tex, they all did the whole, reborn Christian thing, especially Atkins. you know, I don't believe in being an apologist for any of these people. I think that they
Yeah.
did what they did,
Well,
and they have to own it.
well, it's what's so interesting is that they turned to the kind of Christianity in the 80s and 90s that now, yeah, as you know, now uses our current president to take over the,
Yeah.
install a dictatorship. And I'm not taking bad means, but it's an interesting connection. It's like they don't, I'm not trying to, I guess I am. I mean, I'm judging, but there's a lot of problems with religion, traditional religion, and sort of this interesting move from this, I think, a kind of a satanic group of Manson, influenced by forms of Satanism, all the way. I'm gonna become a born again Christian while I'm in prison. I mean, I don't want to speculate. Yeah, I share your suspicion of them. I think they, I don't, and actually, I agree with you that they shouldn't have been released, which is kind of, I'm a
Yeah, I
hardliner.
mean, I don't think I don't think any more of them should ever be released, and I don't think that they will. I think Van Houten was maybe the one exception to the rule because
Yeah.
she always claimed that she's. I think before going into her, we have to talk about the following night.
Yeah, let's do
when
that. Yeah.
they got away with the the Tate murders at the CieloDrive house, and then the following night, and correct me if I'm wrong about who was in the car on what nights, because these are the things that sometimes I can't I
Yeah.
sometimes confuse who was in the car on which night, and I believe
Right.
it was again Kasabian, or
Well,
maybe Kasabian. I don't remember.
I know that in the
Kasabian was
the Lobianka murders, Charles Manson prepared them by tying them up and then left the house. So he would have been in the car, even though he didn't do so. So he was present, Charles. I do know that. And there's yeah, these details.
Yeah, so that's right. So and I believe that
and also I'm one of those people that does believe that Charles Manson went to the scene of the crime on CieloDrive and looked and moved things around. And again, yeah, I do think that there's a debate about that because the bodies are moved. Yeah.
There's debate about a lot of stuff. There's so much debate about a lot of stuff.
There is, but I do think Manson did that. I do think he went there.
Yeah, I wouldn't, I wouldn't say it couldn't happen.
Right.
So on the second night, they went out again, and this time it was the second night that Van Houten was along because she wanted to go. She had heard what had happened on night one, and she wanted to go on night two. She wanted to participate in murder. And they went to the home of Lino and Rosemary LaBianca. He owned supermarkets. That's it. He owned grocery stores. They were well-to-do, but they weren't like uber wealthy or anything like that. And it turns out later, I think that the reason that they went to this specific house is just because they had once been to a party at the house next door or down the street. There was just some very vague connection or some vague knowledge of the house and no idea who lived in it. They went inside, and I think it was again Krenwinkel and then Watson and Van Houten. I'm not sure that Atkins was there that night. But in any case, two brutal murders of these people. And here's an irony that apparently the LaBiancas had been very concerned about what they had heard had happened the night before.
Yeah, they were worried. They were worried about getting killed by whoever did the night.
I know, and so they were like, they themselves were worried, and then it happens to them, and then this is where when Charlie says, "Oh, leave something witchy," like the way that Tate on the first night was tied up, and this in the second case, that they stabbed the LaBiancas with cutlery, with forks, and then they wrote "piggy" on the wall. It just incredibly just psychopathic, deranged stuff.
In blood they wrote "war." I don't remember which night.
They wrote different words. They wrote "war." They wrote "piggy." They wrote "rise." They wrote "HelterSkelter." Yeah, then later on it came out that, it was supposed to look like black people had committed the crimes and that they were trying to start a race war. All this kind of nonsense.
That's Bugliosis' theory. It very much is. He was the proponent of, of the theory that it was trying to, well, but there's there's some evidence. So it is, I'll hold that thought. It is true that, you know, I'm going to say might shock some people, because Manson is anti-police, anti-pig. Manson kept going to the police department, asking to join with them to fight the Black Panthers. That's a fact. So in other words, that is the dimension. Manson was a white supremacist of a kind. It's a weird mixture of white supremacism with hippie. So the thing about Manson is the things that normally don't go together. It's putting things together that opposites, and I'm gonna
go off on a little now because you said that. I'm gonna go on a little tangent based on what you just said. Is that it was just weird mishmash of beliefs, right? And really a bunch of beliefs that contradict one another, but also none of them really feel true. It's kind of the same mishmash of garbage, you know, gobbledygook brain stuff that you see in all of these like mass shooters and these like incel shooters, and like even the latest one that killed Charlie Kirk. It's like all the same, like, oh, I believe all of this stuff. None of it makes any sense. None of it really goes together. It all contradicts because at the end they don't have any real beliefs, you know. And at the end of the day, I think that all of it is just a cover up for a very fragile ego.
Well, we can look at it psychologically. I'm not one to look at it psychologically as you are. You're the psychologist here. You're saying, well, what function does this incoherence serve? I have trouble getting past the incoherence. So in the case of Tyler Robinson, he's left. I mean, I've met people. I say this delicately. These people would never shoot anybody, but they have a lot of the same ignorance, the same cluelessness of the shooter, this Tyler Robinson. Very same. They will say, well, they'll say, I'm a fan of Charlie Kirk. He really is exciting on Monday. And then on Tuesday, they'll be like Black Lives Matter. Exactly. They're right. They're socialists. They're one, but it's that very, and so now that I leave to the side whether that incoherence is a profile of a psychological type, because that's important, but I'm fascinated by the kind of the insanity. And also, that's kind of the insanity of a Charles Manson, I have to say. So here we go. People that would never. This is a sobering truth. People that are innocent that would never kill anybody, in their cognitive style, just walking around millions of people, have the lack of commitment, the mismatch. They're sort of liberal, sort of conservative, sort of hate Trump today, love Trump tomorrow. This kind of this tells me that might not be a personality disorder. That might be a problem in human cognition itself, in sort of deciding what one believes in the world. I don't want to get too, but it's just sort of putting that out there.
Yeah, I think that's I think that's very true, and I think that it's also tied into not just a lack of cognition, but a lack of self-identity, a lack of knowing who you are at your core.
Yeah,
and that's
well, inability.
Many of these people are young. They're young.
Manson cult. So the Manson cult is militantly anti-Black Panther. He wants to enlist the sheriff's department. This is Manson. The sheriff's department is arresting. Imagine somebody's institution's been arresting you your whole life. All your trauma, your suffering is because of this department locking you in jail since you were a child. And you go to them. You hate African Americans so much. You go to them and say, help me out. We need to fight the Black Panthers. I mean, what I'm saying is that kind of, insane.
Let me ask you, like, what do you think what that was all about? Because, when he was in prison, he had to survive prison by making friends with other inmates, Many of them were Black. And so what's the hatred of Black people about, do you think?
I don't know. I mean, I think, so he does shoot Bernard Crow, who was a drug dealer, and thought he had killed Bernard Crow, who was African-American drug dealer. And so what is that about? I mean, again, do you want me to really be blunt and answer? I guess.
Yeah, I want to hear your thoughts, because,
I think the degree to which Manson believes anything, like the degree to which Tyler Robinson believes anything, the person that's in the news now, it's a mixture. So I think that Charles Manson is part hippie, free love, love is good, part Satanist, actually, part sort of Southern, Midwestern, rural religiosity, which is evangelical, part white supremacist, part, so so again, it's a mixture. So I think one part of them hated African Americans. However, that same person, if he needed something from an African American, like if he needed girls to entertain, because Charles Manson would steal 14 and 15-year-old girls and force them to have sex at parties on ranch. I mean, that's, if you want to do that, if you're doing that kind of activity, which of course now is much more offensive than it would have been then. Unfortunately for then, it was not, it was more accepted in the 60s, I have to say, in the 70s.
It was, that's true.
We could talk about that, probably because I think 15-year-old girls were seen as like we now see 22-year-old girls, possibly. I don't know. Again, these are we're into difficult waters, but you asked me, so if we treat Charles Manson as just a psychopath that doesn't really have beliefs, and his beliefs are a cover for his manipulation, which is one interpretation, that's one thing. But if we take him as a human being that actually has beliefs, one of those beliefs might be basically white supremacy, and just, is that too simple, or is that, I don't know, or
well, I think there's clearly some kind of a white supremacy element to his, his mishmash of, thoughts. But that said, the whole hippie kind of counterculture was a very white phenomenon. It was very, very white phenomenon. You've got to wonder, like, why that movement and that culture was so appealing to so many white kids. And I think when you look closer, when you really examine who was in that movement, it did tend to be a lot of like these kids that grew up in like post-war white suburban America, and they just did not want to live with the constraints of this kind of, lack of openness.
Right. I should say that there are strong, very vivid, vibrant examples of the contrary of that exist, but they stand out. Like, for example, coming out of the hippie movement, what comes to mind are the White Panthers. Now, the White Panthers was a Marxist, Maoist, Leninist, right, radical communist group that was allied with the Black Panthers. But that was just a few white hippie kids that did join. So again, accepting the ones that were really committed, they don't. So they're the exception to what but the rule is what you're saying. White middle class, upper middle class kids bringing their racism to being a hippie.
Mitch, all you have to do is watch Woodstock. All you have to do is look at the footage from Woodstock. It's a white movement, and by association, the Manson family was a white phenomenon. I don't think, and my theory is that, my thinking is that in prison, Manson, he was probably a joke, because he's a joke. Like anybody who can see him for what he really is, you can see that he's a carnival barker, that everything he's doing is theater and attention seeking, that none of it's really real, and that whatever few beliefs he has, I believe that maybe the white supremacy part might be one of the very few kind of beliefs he had, but I don't think any of his beliefs were really global beliefs. I don't think he had universal beliefs. I think every single belief that he had was really about him, about something, deep, this guy had a very fucked up psychology for sure. But mostly it's that he, the paradox of narcissism is that the bigger the narcissist, the more they feel like really like shit about themselves inside. The smaller they feel, the bigger of a show they have to make. So you saw Charlie, always being theatrical and performative and very attention seeking. And it's related to this very malignant narcissism. So I think that the white supremacy was really only as meaningful to the extent that he himself was a white guy. Like in some way, Charlie was kind of like the prototype incel, that came along, decades later, where he's this aggrieved white guy.
No, that I mean, the connect, now that so maybe that's all the more reason why I'm doing an episode of Mindset, because it's a way to talk about our present in a way, because it's a, yeah, I mean,
I think that there are I think that there are definitely strong parallels, you could say, think about this way. If Manson were alive now, he would just start a YouTube channel. He wouldn't need to start a cult. He wouldn't need to recruit
he
off the street.
He would be an influencer, but he would also be doing some, but he would also be like an Andrew Tate. He would
Absolutely.
and he would probably be, he would probably be forcing sex and molesting people.
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right about that. I think he would be some combination of Tate and Alex Jones and all of these different characters. So I think and
and that same person might, on his day off on a Saturday, get a gun and try to shoot Trump or Kirk or Nancy Pelosi. Again, it's that weird,
absolutely.
It's that weird incoherence. Like, where do you stand? It's that kind of, the problem is that kind of incoherence of identity is very dangerous. And it's that kind of, one of the problems is that naive people look at that and say, oh, they're independent. That's what really angers me now. It's sort of like the people, I'm very suspicious if somebody says now in 2025, oh, I'm not a liberal or conservative, or I'm not a Democrat or Republican, I'm independent. That person, you're dealing with something, that's a red flag, because that person, it's not always, but
because I'm somebody who definitely has always been on the left, but in the past, I would say 10 to 15 years, there are things happening on the left that I don't agree with, and I figured out.
But here's what I mean when I say that. So everybody in my circle of people that says that to a person, to a person, they were the people that stayed home on January 2020 and did not vote.
Right. Yeah.
So it's really code. So I don't, I'm an independent thinker. I'm saying not always, of course.
I wouldn't, I see, I know exactly the archetype of person you're talking about. It's like, as if they are like so strong-minded that nobody could possibly influence from one way or the other. Like, we're all influenced by something. We're all influenceable.
They were the people. I'm talking about people that did not see the stakes in the last election.
You're talking about the people who were stubborn.
All sides are bad. The Democrats
that's right. Yeah, no, I'm definitely not like that. I'm still very much left-leaning. It's just that I feel like now, certain. I don't want to get off on that tangent, but anyway. But yes, I think there are very strong parallels between Charles Manson and many of the characters that we see now, kind of constantly coming up either in the news or in the influencer world. And I think that's why this case resonates, because there are these strong parallels with these very, kind of white Christian movements. So going back to the case, come back
to a point that you said in some ways this could not have happened in 87 today. So there's a dimension in which it would have been impossible, but what is with us, unfortunately, is the mindset that didn't go away, right? The thing we're talking about now, but that's kind of, that didn't.
The mindset didn't go away. And I'm convinced that this had to happen. This could only have happened in a kind of pre-internet, kind of post-Summer of Love, but still in chaos due to the Vietnam War and, racial tension. And, not that that's ever gone away, but, this was an era also of a lot of, riots in Chicago and LA. And, there was a chaos. It was chaos in America. Once, I think after the Vietnam War was finally ended, after Carter took office, at some point, everybody was I think people, we go in cycles where we just get exhausted by chaos, and we just want and that's when, and then disco came along, and then
as you know, Tom O'Neill titles his book Chaos. We can get to it in a second. That's I didn't want to get to, but chaos. Yeah, chaos is what is it?
It's still, there's no easy explanation though for why this group. So we have to talk about, the context and also drugs, the role of drugs in all of
Oh
this,
yeah.
because Charlie used drugs.
Oh
He
yeah.
used psychedelics and narcotics in
Both.
order to, manipulate and brainwash the people in the family, which are mostly women. But
Right.
he was also effective at brainwashing the young men who joined. So,
Right.
for example, one of the more outspoken family members who never got charged with any of the murders or anything, never participated, was Paul
Mhm.
Watson.
Yes.
Um, and he made the rounds of, the talk shows during the 70s and even into the 80s. And he talked a lot about like how Charlie recruited the men. And the way that Charlie recruited the men is he used the women as bait.
That's
So,
right.
they would drive this van around looking for hitchhikers, and if they see
Yeah.
like a young man who's relatively like nice looking kid, they'd stop, they'd offer him some, a joint, or, do you want to have some group sex, or do you want, whatever. And that's how he got the guys involved. He used the girls
Mhm.
as the bait.
Right.
But getting the girls, now this is the thing, okay? These are all young women when they're
Sure.
meeting Charlie. They're all teenagers,
Oh
basically.
yeah.
And this guy is already, pushing 40.
Yeah.
So what is this about? There's some kind of a daddy, like, there's some kind of like a
Oh yeah.
father figure thing going on here, and he really played into that. You have to remember that the cult, what became a cult, um, started out as just kind of a normal hippie commune. In the
Original.
beginning, there was
And
oh,
and
there
also
was
also Manson was bisexual to the degree to which he had any identity, and
sure,
he starts off having mainly sexual relations with other men. As you know, he was raped, so he was raped by men in prison, but also he himself
yeah,
raped men, but he also raped men outside of prison. So
yeah,
that's kind of his
everything.
trajectory. Starts with that. Well, the females, girls came later in a way. It's almost like, I think, of course, maybe it's apocryphal. The story of saying, Charlie, you need to go with girls because they're easier to brainwash than we gay males, or whatever the term. I don't know. It's strange. I know that's not his,
You
but
have
it
to
is.
wonder, like, is that true? Like, I don't
Well,
know.
it is in terms of the trajectory because of
Yeah.
the yeah. So he gets that
So,
idea. Again,
so
Manson
again,
doesn't have any ideas of his own. He talks to somebody and said, he talks to somebody who was involved in prostitution, and they say, well, you got to do this. I don't think that it isn't that Charlie Manson, right? Just like he steals to the process church, a lot of ideas from the process church. I mean, was active. He certainly, I don't think Charlie would have gotten into animal torture and animal murder and that kind of stuff and drinking blood of animals, which they did in their ceremonies, if he hadn't known that the Grentins, the process church, but again, not to get too,
what
influenced by what's around you. That's
process church, the process church angle is one that I'm not very familiar with. So, could you elaborate on the process church?
it's just it's just a church, right? By
Right.
a husband and wife named De Grentis, a husband and wife who later divorced, and it's it's an import from England, and they come in and they're very powerful in California of the 60s, and have their tentacles, and that's all I'm going to say.
Okay.
They're involved in nefarious activities, occult
Is
activities.
is there any direct connection between the process church and Manson or the family members?
Yes, there is, and that Manson liked them, hung out with them. So it's interesting.
Okay.
Manson was influenced by two big churches. I mean, they then were not big. Well, Process was pretty big actually then, and that, of course, I mean Scientology and Process.
Right,
Scientology
right.
and Process were in a war with each other. They hate each other. So there's a lot of complex sort of espionage, and because they were out, Process and Scientology were out to see who's going to be who's going to be the church that everybody joins. And there's a lot of
Wow, okay.
between those two
That's
churches.
very interesting. Okay. I
But
had no idea.
all the ideology of the Process church, death is not real, Jesus and Satan are one, What does that remind you of? It's all all the
Oh
stuff meant
yeah, that's Charlie,
all
and yeah,
all
that's what
all the
Charlie would
doctors.
say about himself.
Yeah, yeah, he stole all of that from the process
Wow.
church. Just like he
And
did.
he definitely
Hmm?
and he definitely got, the main thing I think he got from Scientology
Oh
was
yeah,
that in order to rebuild the self, you have to tear the self down completely. And this is what
yes,
he would do in
to
his,
that
drug taking sessions with the
state.
family members. And what
Right.
he would do is actually he would dose the girls and the boys with a much, much heavier dose than what he took. He himself would take very, very
Of
little of the
course,
substance or
of course.
sometimes none, so that he could be lucid as he is manipulating them psychologically. And then, so, I think then we have to get to where if the Manson family started as something that was more like kind of a regular hippie commune, there were many of them popping up all over America and other parts of the world as well, actually.
Yeah,
In the beginning, they really were just kind of collective communal living.
yeah. In the beginning.
Um, in the beginning, and they lived on Spawn Ranch, which, just in case listeners don't know what that was, it was an old ranch owned by a guy named George Spahn, I think it was, that was used to film westerns. It was used as a movie set. This was basically a disused movie set at this point, but it was still owned by an older man who, had very poor eyesight. He may have been even completely blind, if I'm not recalling correctly. Um, and the girls took care of George.
Yeah.
They cooked for him. They did
Well,
other
more
things.
than
They did,
well, in more than one
yeah,
way. In the
they cooked in
sexual.
more than one way for him, I think. But I think he just really liked the girls.
Yeah, he
And
did.
so, in return for living on the ranch for free, the
Oh,
girls just kind of took care of him. So, I mean, whatever, that was like, he couldn't have known that these were going to become like murderous, a murderous cult.
no, no.
That's not on him. So, but as far as people saying that they took advantage, like, this is where I kind of diverge from where some of the theories go. I don't think they were taking advantage of George Spahn. I think it was very like, tit for tat, like, no pun intended, but it was, he was getting something out of it too,
That he
you
was.
know. And there was like no harm, no foul. They weren't, I've heard that, allegations that they abused him. I've never seen anything to really corroborate that. Mostly what you see is that it was kind of
Right.
a give and take. So in any case, things at some
I
point
mean,
when
the Manson girls again. You can get distracted by shiny things that shouldn't be shiny, or I
yeah,
mean, so I mean, but the
yeah,
Manson girls, what the Manson girls did to their own babies.
oh
See, we
yeah,
focus
yeah,
really
of
awful.
course,
So I mean, there's an account in this book of one of the girls performing. I should say, I mean, this is a show fellatio on her own infant. I mean, it's insane.
yeah.
Insane. I mean, that's just
Yeah, I
so.
remember reading that.
Why do we even care? Why do we
Be-
care about George Spahn? Why are we focused on him? There's this because of the. It's just sort of weird to me. Like I'm not a I'm not a detective. I'm not really a true crime person. I don't know if I'm becoming one. I doubt it. I don't know. But
I
why
think
do
you
you
are.
get distracted? Why do people focus on the lesser crime or the non-crime and these glaring, you have all these awful things happening to babies and children that never gets talked about. Strange. Why
No,
is
you're
that?
right. You're absolutely
We're
right.
focused on
And
this
that
whole
was
thing.
But that was also part of Manson kind of breaking down all of their boundaries, because that was his
Yeah,
goal,
right,
is
right.
to break the more boundaries that you break. And then this is a specific cult strategy.
Yes, yeah,
You break people, you tear down the boundaries,
yeah.
so that everything is permissible. Because they're coming from
That's
these.
what Jim Jones does that, and Jones.
Exactly. And it doesn't start out that way, because if you tried to sell this to any of those people that joined the family from the get-go, if you said, okay, you're going to come in, I'm going to have you do like depraved acts on your own children, I'm going to have you, pimp out your own kids. They
Yeah.
would be like, are you insane? I'm not joining this. But of course, you never, they don't ever sell you what the real product is.
That comes later. That comes
right.
later. At the beginning, you talk about, at the beginning, you talk about we got to get out of Vietnam. Something very innocuous. Or
and
you talk about the establishment's bad.
And he was a master of love bombing, like if you talk to people who work in like domestic abuse and domestic crises, you'll hear every abusive partner starts basically an abusive relationship between, usually it's going to be a man and an abused woman, like 90+% of the time. What you see is like the man using kind of cult-like tactics. It's just that the cult is just a cult of one. But they use the same kind of tactics, the love bombing, and the gradually pushing and breaking down boundaries. And so this is what Manson did with these girls. And that takes us to the creepy crawlies. But before we get to the creepy crawls, we have to talk about at what point did this turn from just, a weird guy with a lot of hangups who wants to control, who wants to be a cult leader. I think he just kind of wanted to be a cult leader and get all of the benefits of that, the sex and the free life and the free money, somebody cooking for you all the time. I think in the beginning, it was all about just ego and pleasure and control for him. Where did it turn so ugly that these kids turned to not just like a regular murder, but absolutely deranged bloodbath kind of horror movie stuff. And so this is where we have to talk about Charlie's aspirations as a singer-songwriter.
Yep. Okay.
Because this is, for me, where it turns, and this is where maybe I start to diverge from a lot of other theories and theorists as to what the motive was. Because I'm of the opinion that the CIA didn't make him do it. The CIA wasn't behind this stuff, like I can talk about that, but like I'm on record that I don't believe any of that stuff, even though some of it might feel like it fits very nicely like a jigsaw puzzle. I think that it's much simpler than that. I think I think that because of, he truly did have a tragic childhood. He did. And I can feel sad for the little kid that experienced all that shit. But once he became an adult, he made, one choice after another to just continue to be an extremely evil person.
Yeah.
He had designs on being a singer-songwriter.
Oh yeah.
And weirdly, he wasn't bad. He was not bad. He wrote a few good songs. At some point, he got introduced to Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys.
Right.
So a lot of people don't know that there's this connection between the Manson family and the Beach Boys.
Yes.
So Dennis Wilson was the drummer of the Beach Boys. He was the prettiest Beach Boy, but most people are going to agree on this, that he's not the most talented of the Beach Boys. He was kind of the pretty boy, kind of a mediocre musician. He didn't write the songs. So he gets introduced to Manson.
Dennis Wilson is a little bit like Bobby Beausoleil. He's the heart all the women love, like Pamela DeBar. I'm with a band, the women.
Very good looking.
Well, no, Pamela DeBar goes on and on about how Bobby Beausoleil is like Cary Grant. She says the most beautiful woman. Very similar to.
And it's true. Bobby Beausoleil was very, most of the boys on the ranch were also very good looking. Like he wanted attractive people around him. Paul Watson, gorgeous kid. Bobby Beausoleil was gorgeous. He looked like a young Alain Delon or something.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I didn't mean that. I just thought.
So in any case, he gets introduced to Dennis Wilson. Dennis Wilson falls under his spell. Because again, it's the drugs and the girls and the endless sex parties. And, Dennis Wilson's house just basically became a sex club.
Interesting.
Like a den of sex and drugs for quite a while. And at some point, Charlie kind of took over. There's in Mike Love's autobiography, Mike Love,
I have not read that. Okay.
So the singer of the Beach Boys.
Oh yeah.
He wrote a bit about this period when Dennis was involved with Manson, and he says at some point that like he was taking a shower and Manson came into the shower and said something to him like, "You need to come join us." And Mike Love was like, "I don't think so. I'm out of here." And he
Oh,
said
wow.
like he bolted, and they all told Dennis like, "You got to get away from this guy. He's weird.
Good.
Something's not right about him."
Yeah.
But Dennis was really like, super into the whole lifestyle.
Well, yeah.
Then, so Dennis, at some point, I think it was Dennis that introduces Charlie to Terry Melcher.
That's right.
And Terry was a record company executive, also the biological son of Doris Day.
DorisDay, of all people. Wow.
But he himself made his name as being, he became known as a kind of hit maker in the
Yeah.
music industry. He was behind kind of spotting a lot of bands at the time who, a lot of them were kind of one-hit wonders, but he was really good at finding who could like really break the charts. So
We're talking about like strawberry alarm clock, maybe.
Maybe Strawberry Alarm, maybe the Birds,
The
I can't
Birds,
remember
certainly.
exactly like which, what bands, but he was very good at kind of spotting like who was really like,
Right.
ripe for that cultural musical moment.
Yeah.
He gets introduced to Charlie, and he listens to his songs. He basically says, yeah, and so Charlie's excited. He's thinking that, this is gonna be my moment. I'm finally, I've had this shit life,
Right.
in and out of jail, and now I'm finally going to be, a rock star. That was what he really wanted. I mean, who doesn't? He wanted to be a rock star. So Melcher like kind of humors him a little bit, I think. And then he never hears anything from him.
Oh, yeah.
And then he goes to Melcher's house at some point. He goes
Okay.
to Melcher's house and knocks on the door.
Wow.
Guess where Melcher lived at this point? In the CieloDrive house,
That's right.
where the murders would take place later. That was Melcher's place.
That's significant. Very significant.
Yeah, so Melcher was the tenant before
Polanski.
Sharontate and Roman Polanski.
Mhm.
So Charlie knocks on the door and says, and he's met very coldly by Melcher, even though Melcher's kind of freaked out, like, oh man, this guy's at my door. And Melcher definitely had like, and he had instincts. This guy, he could feel like there's something not right about this dude. And he says to Charlie something along the lines of, like, I think some of your songs are really good, man, but honestly, I just don't know what to do with you commercially. Like, I wouldn't know how to market you. I wouldn't know, you're already like, 37 years old or whatever at this time. I don't know how I would sell you.
Yeah.
And he like says, so yeah, thanks for stopping by, closes the door, that interaction's over. That is the moment that everything turned in that moment. I think that was the turning point for Charlie.
Terry Melcher says, "You are not Donovan."
Yeah, Terry Melcher basically says, whatever dreams you have of being a star, you're not it, dude.
You're not Roger Daltrey or Donovan, so you're there.
Yeah. And and this is a guy with a very fragile ego, a very poor sense of self, lack of real true identity. I'm the devil, I'm Jesus, this fucking, sorry for the F-bomb, but when I talk about Manson, like, it's very hard not to like drop a few F-bombs, because this guy is just such a character. So Manson at this point, that's where the real seed of like resentment and hatred and anger start growing, and it gets worse. So at this, at this juncture, Dennis Wilson's also getting sick of him, and at some point, Charlie basically took over Wilson's house. He basically became the master of Wilson's house, and then Wilson starts telling his bandmates and other people in his life, like, I can't get this guy out of my house now. I think I'm in too deep.
Yeah, the guest leave.
Yeah, and at some point, I think he may have just paid Charlie to leave. I don't remember exactly how he got him out of there, but at some point he did.
Mm-hmm.
So Charlie goes back to Spawn Ranch or wherever they were living by this point. I think it was Spawn Ranch, and then this record comes out by the Beach Boys. It was a B-side.
Yes.
And it was Manson's song. And Dennis Wilson had, in fact, stolen his song. That is 100% true.
I have this is really important thing I want to add to that. So the song title changes.
Yeah.
The original title would be cringeworthy to women today, because the original title was "Cease to Resist," which is a celebration of wearing a girl down to have sex with her. Don't resist me. A celebration of a kind of a. That's actually what the lyrics of that song are. It's not so innocent, right? Manson changes it to "Cease to Exist."
Yeah.
I'm sorry. The Beach Boys change it
to
"Cease to Exist," I think, right? So
no, I think that Charlie's title ended up being "Cease to Exist," and the Beach Boys changed, or Dennis Wilson, I should say, because the Beach Boys as a whole did not know that Dennis Wilson had literally plagiarized this song. He changed the lyrics and changed the title to "Never Cease to Love" or "Never Not Love" or something like that.
I thought it was "Cease to Resist" versus "Cease to Exist." I thought it was that.
No, it was "Cease to Exist" was the original. But it wouldn't surprise me if "Cease to Resist" was Charlie's original title. But the title, it was on Charlie's demo tape. It was called "Cease to Exist," and then Wilson gave it different lyrics, but it's the same melody, the same hook.
Yeah, it's plagiarism.
It is clearly a ripoff of Manson's song. And of course, if Manson wasn't already aggrieved by this point from, almost 40 years of grievance, plus now, he's not going to have a music career. Now he's super, super pissed. Now a Beach Boy has stolen his music. Stolen money from him, basically, by stealing his music.
That's right.
So you can't blame Manson at this point for at least that.
No, that's
but what a normal person, if you think somebody's plagiarized your work, you sue them, you take them to court. Manson, for him, it was I think just decades of pent up rage and grievance and feeling put upon by the world and feeling entitled. Again, it's that narcissistic entitlement and rage.
Mm-hmm.
And this is when things start to go dark within the family and on the ranch. So they start something that they had always done within the family is that the girls would go on these kind of trash runs where they would do dumpster dives to feed themselves. So they figured out that supermarkets would throw away perfectly good food beyond the expiration date, and that most of it was still perfectly edible. They would go to that supermarket and go jump right in the dumpster and pull out all the good stuff and take it back to the ranch, and that's how they would feed themselves. And in a way, that's very clever. But then he started having them once he got it in his head that he wanted big revenge against Hollywood, against the industry, against the music industry, against everybody, against rich people. He started sending certain members on these creepy crawls where they dressed in black and they were often barefoot. And they were to break into the homes of wealthy people and rearrange the furniture, move things around, not do any property damage, not steal anything, just a kind of weird, poltergeisty kind of gaslighting. And then
it's kind of a mind fuck, right? Because
it's meant to be a mind fuck.
Imagine if you come home and nothing's stolen and touched except one chair is in the middle of the room. You didn't know, put that kind of thing, put the one chair.
Yeah, and it really, it's unnerving, if you imagine, if you came back to your place and you found everything rearranged, but nothing's missing. And that's almost, there's something almost more almost more.
Well, it's done on purpose. It's to make the person who's the victim of this think nobody's been here really. It must be me. Which is the gaslighting aspect of it, because the way
it's very gaslighty, and then or also just we're letting you know that we can get into your homes anytime you want. In fact, this trope of the creepy crawl was used years later in a German movie about these three kind of revolutionary counterculture kids who would break into homes to do exactly what the creepy crawls did and rearrange furniture and stuff like that. So
it's also in the American movie Martha Macy May. Do you seen this, Martha?
No, I haven't seen that.
Oh, it's a must see.
Okay.
Martha Macy May Marlene, American movie, independent movie about a cult. About it's called really, really good film.
I'm gonna guess that, I mean, I'm gonna guess that other people have done this since Manson did it, and probably it was done before. I'm sure that it wasn't the most original idea. None of his ideas were original, so it's hard to think that this one was. What he was really doing with the creepy crawls was, again, breaking down their boundaries and getting them accustomed to breaking into people's homes dressed in black, because the goal was ultimately he wanted to kill Melcher.
That's right.
I think he really wanted to kill Melcher. He wanted to kill Dennis Wilson and probably any of the Beach Boys. I think those guys all came very close. Like, they could have easily been the victims. Melcher had already moved out of the CieloDrive house. And a point of strong debate, even to this day, is, did Manson know that Melcher no longer lived there or not? Now, a lot of people so I think Mike Love in his book said, oh yeah, Charlie already knew that Melcher didn't live there anymore. I'm not so sure. Some people have said, well, the house just became a symbol of, rejection, and that's why he put all of his attention on killing everybody in the house. It was really about the house. I don't believe that. I don't think so. I think that he wanted to kill Wilson and Melcher. I don't think he knew that Melcher had moved. I think that he fully expected that Melcher would be there. And
it's interesting. I mean, I agree with you actually on this, and it's interesting that Manson criticizes the girls the night of that murder, after having gone back to the scene of crime and investigated himself, which he did do. Said it was too sloppy. He said, that's the word he used to the girls. He said, you did such a sloppy murder. So when we go to, so it's interesting. So maybe too sloppy as we didn't get the right people. Maybe it's really wanted Dennis Wilson and Melcher. I thought Melcher was living there. I don't know.
One thing you can be sure of is that Charlie would have read the newspapers. He would have wanted to see the news. And my thinking is, he sees that Melcher was not listed among the victims. And so he's still got all this pent up rage. He wants to kill more people.
Of course, I have to say that the killing of Polanski and sharontate is perfect in one way, because it encourages them to indulge in a time-honored ideology of, and this is something I talk about in Journey of Anesthete a lot, the censorship mindsets, and sort of, art causes bad things. So in other words, actually in the documentary, the girls say this, Polanski is responsible because he made Rosemary's Baby. So, you deserve to die, or, you automatically are going to be a victim of a crime because you made this Hollywood movie about Satanism. And this is deep. This is so deep in our culture.
But it's true. A lot of people really felt like there was some kind of
believe that.
Yeah, I think even to this day, people think there's some kind of a supernatural connection between Rosemary's Baby and then what happened.
There's the metaphysical necessity that it really did cause it. I don't take that at all seriously. I reject that out of hand. What I'm interested in is the censorship impulse. I'm interested in, these bad movies, these bad TV shows. There's a lot of rants in Tarantino's work. Remember, there's a long discussion in the car before the girls commit the murder. In Tarantino's film, there's actually a pretty good piece of writing by Tarantino where Sadie, one of the girls, says, your movies suck. Their Hollywood movies are evil. They're bad. Literally, the Manson girls, you know who they sound like? They sound like Tipper Gore. The same exact argument.
Interesting.
Well, this is something interesting because I'm fascinated with this impulse to attack works of art. Again, I don't want to but we're an arts podcast, and that's significant. But that you're right. That's the girls are indulging a little bit of that. Polanski, you can't be responsible for what happens to you. You put out a movie like Rosemary's Baby. You put out a movie like Fearless Vampire Killers. The karma, they would use that spin, right? The karma will come back on you.
Yeah, it's whatever your beliefs are, you're going to find a way to kind of make it fit, make the facts believe.
Right.
So this is why, for me, of course, over the decades, there have been numerous conspiracy theories. And again, You
I
want
don't
to say
know.
what's the conspiracy?
Don't
Um,
know.
that's a good question. You know,
What's a good?
maybe a better word is just theory. Okay, so maybe just a theory of like why he did it or what really happened. I think obviously if you want to bring the CIA into it, of course that's a lot more interesting than just some crazy guy with
With a grudge.
with a bunch of personal grievances because he feels so small in the world. I think that if you look at most of these kind of like, this kind of incel variety of killer,
Yeah,
where there's this big elaborate explanation for why they did this thing. Like the Son of Sam is a perfect example. Son of Sam, David Burger, he's an incel. That's it. He's just an incel. All of the barking dogs and hearing voices, all nonsense to cover up the fact that he couldn't get a date and he was jealous of everybody who could. He was incredibly envious of people who actually were in love or in lust or couples in general. It's the same. It's the Zodiac killer, same thing.
Right. I do want to. So you and I have both read Chaos. We've both seen Errol Morris's movie. So here's my problem, if I want to put it this way, with Tom O'Neill. It's not a problem with Tom O'Neill, a problem with the use of his theory or the misuse of his investigation and his discoveries. So everything O'Neill discovers is true. There was a Reeve Winston. Reeve Winston was playing around. Government agencies, the CIA, the FBI, were watching and infiltrating groups like Manson, and Manson were watching. I do believe they were watching under surveillance. There's a kind of a look. There's a problem of does something bad happen? You just watch and don't intervene. I think there's even that kind of guilt on the part of authorities. However, those facts don't change anything that you're saying now. So in other words, it's a little bit like, it's kind of like, so I guess my question is, do you need the CIA and FBI for this to happen? And the answer is no, you don't need them.
No.
This is the same story, right? We agree it's the same kind of, the same story. But I do think it's important to point out, and Son of Sam is complex because, well, there was a satanic group. I don't, it's a real group. Again,
I know what you're saying, but see, I look at these things and I think it's not that complex. I really don't think so. I think that a lot of these killers are really good at like muddying the waters because they're still trying. A lot of the time, it's because they're still trying to find a legal loophole. They're still trying
they're trying to get out of responsibility.
Yeah, especially back in those days, they're still trying to find an insanity plea.
See, all I'm saying is that, and I guess we're saying the same thing, but kind of a different. So for me, all of these, I call them facts because the things in Chaos, these are facts. Jolly West was a guy doing shit in the Haight-Ashbury. He was doing, dubious, nefarious shit in the Haight. He was kind of putting on costumes of putting on denim studded jeans and pretending to be hippie. So what I'm saying is that all this stuff can be totally true in Chaos.
Mm-hmm.
And is true and is interesting, but it's not, but none of it is none of it's causal.
Right.
And it's the same. So I'm interested in, why do people make this mistake? I think it's a mistake in logic. I think it's maybe a cognitive error. People see a lot of shiny facts. And they get, I think, deluded by the shiny outsized facts about what the question at hand is.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of facts attached. They like for the fact that, I don't know. So here's a fact. Manson was anti-smoking. And so he ordered his girls after the turn, actually, I think later on, after the meeting with Melcher becomes ugly, actually before the murders, nobody here is allowed to smoke. That's an interesting fact. Is that fact, what's the word, essential to understanding these murders? No, I mean, it's just part of Manson's control.
Yeah, it's just more of control.
I have lung cancer. Okay, I'm a person with lung cancer at the end of my life. I had a bad cigarette habit. I don't know much about Manson, but he was very strict Well, I think Manson was right about that. This is the problem. This is what I think we're all doing. I think that, again, this is, I'm kind of saying, again, it's the misuse of Tom O'Neill. It's not, I don't blame Tom O'Neill himself. It's the misuse of his text to try to, and this is something that we do. Do you have any thoughts on this habit of taking shiny facts and that are facts, but spinning a false narrative out of the fact? Does that kind of make any sense?
Of course it does, and it happens all the time, and we see it all the time, especially in the age of the internet and social media, viral content. Of course, every time there's a kind of
there's a big event,
violent thing, I mean, we see this with the left and the right. It's like,
so I have a transsexual partner, right? So if I have a transsexual partner, I must be okay. I'm not saying this, I'm exaggerating. I must be on the force of goodness. Because I'm fighting against the evil anti-trans Charlie Kirk. So I have a little bit of sympathy. This is the problem. It's like,
this is the problem. I completely agree with you, because none of these things are very relevant at all. When you get down,
what it is that we're taking facts that in one discussion would be relevant, and we're actually, again, we're misusing things. I don't know anything about the shooter. Again, I'm not I'm profoundly ignorant. What I hear. Maybe he had a partner that was trans. Maybe not. Maybe. I mean, I want to say, is it important? I mean, again, look, I think we need to have in the age of the internet, I think we need to have a more comprehensive global discussion, I guess, about logic and critical thinking, and also what is it? Also, what is salient and what is not. I guess these are the kinds of things that true crime. Well, I guess, would you say that homicide detectives deal with this all the time? I mean, because they have to, right? They have to say, well, I
don't know that homicide detectives are especially trained to understand the psychology or logical fallacy arguments either. Their job is to follow the clues and follow the evidence and help the prosecution to build a case. They're not psychologists. They're not, I guess some of them probably have some kind of behavioral sciences training, but that's not really their job. And I think that sometimes people go really hard on the detectives who end up having to work cases like this when we don't know what the hell's we don't know what's going on.
Connected as that people seize on things that they like. Let's bring up Kirk. Like, let's say the god awful Ezra Klein pronouncement. Okay, let's say you like the way Kirk behaved in one debate. Oh, I like what he did there. See, this is a problem. Just like what Manson was against smoking. Manson was, and then you leap. You're like, oh, I guess, I think this is a problem. I guess the term is cherry pick. We cherry pick things.
Yeah, absolutely.
It makes us lose sight of who is a person and what are they really about.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that here, I think, in any discussion about Kirk, you have to.
I really loath to bring that up. I really am, but I had to because it's so.
But you can't not bring it up. I mean, because it just happened, and and it's still going on, and it's now going to be, kind of a reason, an excuse, a justification for kind of stripping away, rights from anybody who identifies as liberal. So I had actually, again, I don't want to get too off on a tangent about Kirk, but in the broader discussion of people who are very good at influencing, who are very good at kind of drawing people in and very good at engaging people, as Charlie was, clearly, they know how to kind of be chameleons as well. Charlie was very good at what he did, is because he knew what Patricia Krenwinkel was hurting from. He knew he figured out what each girl or each guy needed that they were missing from their upbringing, or that their parents didn't give them, or how their girlfriend or boyfriend broke their heart at some point. He had to figure out the individual psychology of each person he was trying to draw in. And all influencers, even online, have to do this.
Interesting.
And the thing about, if you watch Kirk, you'll see a very different personality when he's sitting down in someone else's space on someone else's podcast. If you didn't know anything about him, if you had never seen any of his podcasts or any of his, like, you know, appearances at the Republican National Convention or the MAGA rallies, you would think you were looking at two different people.
Right.
Because there could be a version of him that seemed quite like an affable guy, like you could sit down and have a real conversation with.
Well, that's the thing. That's the problem. So the problem is that we, in our moment now in 2025, we're recording this episode after these assassination, these things. So basically, bottom line, Charlie Kirk is not George Will.
No.
So what happens when you're in a world that tries to make Kirk like William F. Buckley Jr., tries to put that kind of halo around him, and a George Will? Again, it's a lack of perspective. There's all kinds of conservatives, but we're in a moment when you take the worst conservative. You take the worst conservative and you worship him. Of course, partly because he's killed. This is a complex. Again, should we wait? I mean, this is.
I don't know. I don't know that he was the. To be honest with you, I don't know that he was the worst. I could actually.
I'm sure there are again. George Will. So here's my comparison. We got George Will, we got William F. Buckley Jr., and then we got Marjorie Taylor Greene and Charlie Kirk. Like, who's the? It shouldn't be rocket science to say that I'd rather hang out with George Will or have George. I'm just saying.
Well, it's true, but the thing is, I think this, again, going back to Manson and what.
Yeah.
Especially in the age of, in the age where we can all just turn on our screens and see people talking and talk to other people.
Right.
Everything is a very immediate thing. You're talking about George Will and William F. Buckley.
Right.
You had to read these guys for the most part. You might have been able to catch them on, some, late night talk show or whatever. But for the most
part, one time they were quite famous as conservative commentators.
Absolutely. You would see them debating, you would see them, but they were generally, maybe they would get heated. The debates would get heated.
Right.
But we're living in an age now, Mitch, where the more incendiary, the more inflammatory, and the more like rage baity you are, the more clicks you get. So I look at somebody, I look at any of these influencers, and I think, how much of this is real, like, conviction on their part, and how much of this is a grift?
That's why I am so outraged at, and I don't get outraged much, it's not my style, but at Ezra Klein, because when he says this is how you do politics, what he's really saying is be like Charlie Kirk. He's saying don't be like George Will, and so that's, again, I have to be honest.
It makes me wonder if Ezra had seen much of Charlie.
Well, he knows.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
I'm sorry.
The thing is, if you had, again, and I think Charles Manson had this same capacity. I think Charles Manson, when you talk to people who had sat with him privately, people report that he could be like a very normal guy. You could just sit there and talk about sports with him.
The thing about the information is all out there. I mean, everywhere. What he said about African Americans, what he said about women. I mean, just the fact that he said those things should be disqualifying to me. That's me. Look, I'm one. Evidently, it's not disqualifying to Ezra Klein, who's a big liberal, who's a progressive. So I'm saying we live in a very strange world in which I guess progressive commentators, it's sort of like this very episode might be challenged because of what we're saying, but I don't get, let's do it. Let's go here. We're both, adults. We're both. There's a problem living in a world in which you can't identify things by what they are. So when somebody is far right, you can't say they're far right. You have to say, well, they're reasonable, or you have to say they're smooth, or you have to say they know how to have a conversation, or whatever the spins. And you're saying that's a lot like Manson. Manson could appear, believe it or not.
Yeah, he could kind of shape.
He could appear brilliant. Oh, he's a poet. He's a wonderful musician. That's kind of like,
I firmly believe that people behave very differently when there's an audience or camera.
Sure.
Even now, I'm probably a very different person now than if you were sitting here. I mean, actually not. If we were sitting here to be honest, if we were having this conversation in person, I wouldn't be that much different. I'm not saying everyone is like this, but I'm saying a lot.
That's why we love you, and you are on this show. This is
thank you. I do think that a lot of people, that once the camera's going,
Yeah.
Or once they're aware of an audience, and it doesn't have to be a formal audience. I don't mean like an audience in terms of like, a college campus or an auditorium. The audience could be, the other people at your dinner table, or, the other people at the cocktail party who are within earshot. Once you have an audience, you're going to behave differently. You're going to do things differently. You're going to say
Right.
different things,
Sure.
because ultimately you're trying to win people over in some way or another, or you're trying to get attention.
Right.
People have different motivations for acting, differently. But I think that we're in this age where, someone like, say what you will about Donald Trump, he clearly kind of knows what he's doing because he's the president of the United States. How did he
Oh
get
yeah,
there?
no, I would never. So if
You
you
know,
if you well, hold that thought. So if we're going to have to descend to that and discuss him, what is it? 48, 47? I think the number. I don't know what number. What number is he? 47?
47, I think.
Yeah. If we're going to have to lower ourselves that much, So you're talking about his enormous success. So I made the mistake of calling him brilliant, and I got really people don't like that. And and then I reminded him, well, Hitler was brilliant, and so there's there's efficacy, right?
I know brilliant's not the right word, but what I mean to say is, but doesn't Trump use kind of the same tactics that Charles Manson used? Because when Trump was
identical.
when Trump was first coming up and people were comparing him to, Hitler or whatever, I'm like, I don't think so. I was like, I think it feels more like Charles Manson. It feels more like the things that Manson did. Like Trump seems to be able to figure out who needs what in what moment, and he's able to figure it out en masse.
He meets that moment and wins and wins.
Yeah, he's able to do that en masse.
Punishment.
And in some way, he figured out that people are tired of having to filter themselves, having to self-censor, and all of those things. Right. So he comes out and he just breaks bad completely. Yeah. And he comes out and gives everybody permission to be their worst selves. Like, don't filter yourself anymore. Say whatever's on your mind every minute. Can you imagine a marriage or a friendship where you just said whatever was on your mind every minute of the day? There would be no relationships anymore. Like, we all have to exercise some restraint and not blurt out every thought that we have every minute we have it. But at the same time, I think that something that Manson was selling to these kids was freedom. Freedom, love, having to be you don't have to be a good girl anymore. You can be my girl. You can be the girl that does whatever she wants. You can have sex with all of the men and all of the women here. You can do anything you want, and especially imagine if you're a gay kid. Imagine if you're a lesbian or you're gay and you can't come out in this environment of conservative Christian suburbia. And then this guy comes along and says, you can explore all of your sexuality in this,
you have to have sex with
in this family, and so he sells it to them initially as freedom to do this and that. And then he becomes the stage director telling them what to do, but they don't realize they're following orders. That's the real, amazing thing about it is that he convinces them that they're doing it of their own free will. Somehow it's their own free will. And this is the thing, whether it is a Manson or a Trump or anybody in between there, whether it's an influencer doing for good or doing for evil or something just in between, they all kind of have this quality where they are able to kind of zone in on what this person needs or what this group needs, and they're able to kind of, weaponize it in many cases. Or you at the very least utilize it in order to get what they want out of it. And I think this is the thing that we're missing when we keep talking about liberal, progressive, left, right. We're really missing a lot of bigger pictures here.
Those are labels. I mean, I wouldn't say those labels are they still have some relevance, but not much. I mean, they're not, certainly not now. I mean, it's
I think that
I don't know.
I think that the real battle that we should be having is not between left and right, liberal or whatever, or liberal versus extreme leftist, progressive, whatever. The battle is between those of us who just want normal. We just want to go back to something sensible, normal, rational, and everyday life. We want
that shit crazy.
Yeah, we want to.
We don't want
us versus people who are high conflict, who want who need and want constant conflict.
So I guess Deb, you and I are kind of in a way allied because we don't want drama. We kind of don't want war and drama and conflict. We don't get off.
No, dude, I just want to be able to pay my mortgage. I want to have some disposable income to go to a movie. Like, we don't need all this. Like, and this is where I really think we're getting off topic, but
not really. Maybe
we've gotten so far away from economic politics. And this is why this is all happening. If we were to go back to economics, to making sure every person is able to get a job and keep it and have job security, be able to buy a house, be able to buy a car, be able to send your kids to school or to technical,
and be able to go to the doctor and the
or not necessarily go to any college, or maybe a kid wants to pursue a career as a figure skater. Support that. That's what I'm saying. Like, I think there's a lot of things to talk about here, but
I guess a lot of people.
It all ties back to. Sorry, we have a delay.
I guess a lot of people are addicted to the war and the conflict for its own sake. They get off on it. Now, would you say those people are kind of in charge right now, or have a status
Oh God, yeah. Yep. Some of the the people who are in power, the people who have all of the political and actual executive and military power now. It's and but also the opposition has its own issues.
That's right.
And it's not a good idea to ostracize, and if you're on a particular side and you continuously declare certain members of people who have always allied with you to be kind of, if all you're doing at this point is trying to drive home orthodoxy rather than getting back to policy, there's something very wrong in the way you're thinking. Sure. You're caught up now in all of that noise, all of the noise that's out there. And that's kind of the goal of the internet. That's kind of the goal of all of these tech algorithms, to keep us engaged in rage. It's all designed by design to keep us angry and rage baiting and rage clicking all day long, so that we don't really pay attention to the economic discrepancy that keeps growing and growing and growing. So, I think I've probably outed myself as the socialist, that I am. But anyway, that's off topic, of course. Probably edit this stuff out.
No, we don't edit anything. This is a show. I mean, I don't know. I mean, yeah, I agree with all those things. I just, well, before even good things like this episode come to an end, this Manson episode, is there anything you want to say about respond to Tom O'Neill's what he does with those facts, or his journalism or investigation or anything else, or anything?
I think it's really impressive the way that he's able to kind of connect all of those data points. And even like I said from the beginning, I have very set beliefs about the Manson case, because I've been thinking about this stuff for decades, and I've had that long to kind of process, is this true? And I've also seen every documentary, every book, and you take in all the information, but I keep going back to basically, this was a really messed up dude who, sadly, it's by no fault of his own. He clearly displays clear symptoms of childhood trauma. And then, not to I don't want to get too deep into this, but he was also a little guy. He's not he was not a big tall guy. He was actually not a bad looking guy, but he was a little guy. So you can imagine that probably all of those years in prison, he was really he was getting it bad.
He was raped multiply in prison, and
I am absolutely sure of it. But beyond the rapes, I think he was probably very much.
That's what makes the meaning of TerryMelcher. TerryMelcher is tall. I mean, Terry,
Yeah.
that must be an absolute nightmare for him.
Yeah, I think
Wait, to
there
be
was,
turned down, rejected
I
by
hate to
one
say it, but
Terry Melcher.
I do think that Charlie's like small stature
Oh,
played into his psychological
sure,
grievances
sure.
as well, that, in the grand scheme of, the America that he grew up in, be a big, strong, tall guy. Not everybody can
And
be a big, strong, tall person,
well, that's
like,
what's interesting when he does enlist people that are the opposite type, like
like,
like Bousselet and Watson both.
yeah,
He strategically enlists men of that archetype to do his bidding. Almost like
it's almost like, by proxy, like,
I'm going to get the Joe Namath, the football star,
yeah,
whomever, Fran Tarkins, and I'm dating myself these days. I'm going to get these kind of guys, but I'm going to make sure they're mine. That they can't have their own.
It's true. It's almost like he's using the men as like bodysuits, like he's somehow like, he's inside of them, operating them, like literally, Tex, they're doing his stuff.
Oh yeah.
And I think that there's so many things that go into this guy's psychology, but I think that unfortunately anybody who looks up any footage of him, they're going to get a performance. All they're going to see is the theater and the, over the top, ooh, look how crazy I am. And I also think that pretending to be crazy was part of his survival strategy in prison. The crazier you act in prison, even like the most hardcore like gang leaders don't want anything to do with you if they think you're really that unhinged.
Oh yeah, it's a defense.
You can kind of see that right now with this Brian Kohberger, who slaughtered these 4 college students in Idaho. And all of the reports coming out now is that he's so creepy and weird. There's something so off about him. And in his case, he's not acting. He's definitely, something is really off about him. That even other inmates are like, keep that guy away from me. So I think with Charlie, he figured out that if he just acts nuts, it's a likelier, easier way to keep, because he didn't have the brawn or the height or the strength to keep, to defend himself physically. So the only thing he really had was to be able to like act like he's completely insane and hope that that would be enough to scare off most of these guys coming for him in the night.
I mean, that's it. That's the perfect, I guess, conclusion, Deb. So yeah, it's interesting to think about how, again, thank you for your generosity of time, because it's been 2-hour show almost, right?
Yeah.
Hour and 45 minutes, 42 minutes. And I really, you did help me to look at something in a genuinely new way, because I knew the music rejection was big. But you're saying that's the story here. That's the real.
That was the catalyst that started the path to multiple murders. That was the catalyst. It was all about Charlie. It was all about Charlie just kind of, getting revenge and, satisfying his ego. And I think he was always probably very disappointed that he didn't get Melcher and Wilson.
Oh yeah.
I think that would have been the goal. I think that they would have been, one way or another, I think that had he not been caught, they would have been on the list,
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
They would have been next. Yeah, and it's possible, I think, that Charlie didn't even know where Melcher was living at that time.
Well, I do think he thought Melcher was still there.
Yeah, I believe he thought Melcher was still there, because I don't think he was targeting a house.
I can't thank you enough for coming back for our Travels in the Dark.
Anytime.
This is really, maybe we'll talk about some other cases hopefully in the future.
Sure.
There's some cases that there's a British case that we. Anyhow,
I'm more well versed in these cases from like the 70s and prior. So
okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
I've got some interesting ideas that I'll send you, and if you're interested, let me know.
I'm interested. So you heard it here first.
Okay, cool.
Thank you, Deb, Man and B, and have a good rest of the week.
Thanks, Mitch. Bye.